Okay, so today, welcome back. Today in Unit 3.2, A-Level Buddhism, Practices that Shape and Express Religious Identity, we're looking at different schools of Mahayana and how we're exploring them in the context of the countries they developed and are practiced. And to do this, we need to look at some important writings that are connected with these schools. So it's the writings and it's the historical development of these schools. In the 1st century CE, and to be fair, a little bit further on. Okay, so I hope you get on well with your introduction to Mahayana schools of thought. The word sutra is the Sanskrit for thread. It is the name in Buddhism that was originally given to the sermons of the historical Buddha, like a thread of thought or discourse. And so the word sutra or sutta, these are Pali and Sanskrit transliterations, both refer to the notion of thread. In Mahayana writings, there are 4 main types. You might remember in Theravada, the Pali Canon has the suttas, it has the Vinaya Pitaka, and it has the Abhidhamma. Well, there are 4 types of writing that developed separately in part, and in part sequentially. And this can be quite complex. We're doing, really quite advanced textual studies here. So the first kind of literature that developed in the 1st century BC and the 3rd century AD, and it's absolutely essential for this course, is the perfection of wisdom literature. The prajna, wisdom, paramita, perfection literature. And this includes the Heart Sutra, developed in India generally, which was a summary of these of many texts, and attempted, boiling it all down. What is it all about? Text, the Heart Sutra. But this would also include this list of sutras, a sutra called the Tathagata Sutra, another text developed in the southeast of India. Do you remember this term from last lesson? Thus gone one, a Tathagata, someone who has Buddha nature. Then we have a second kind of strata or developmental stage of the Mahayana texts. These are called the Sukhavati Sutras, or the heavenly or the pure realm sutras. And these developed really very early in the 2nd century, these Pure Land Sutras. And again, they're written in India, but in the northwest, in the frontier region, in now what is Pakistan. Notice the change of direction. Mahayana is being transmitted increasingly northernwards. We also, at about the same time, covering a period 1st to 2nd century, have something developing alongside this called the Lotus Sutra, written in several stages, probably by several authors, adding to the text, developing it, and the key theme of this text is one vehicle, Ekayana, the central Mahayana teaching. Whatever Theravada say, there's only one true way, and we have it. And we can be nice, but really Theravada are anonymous Mahayana believers, whether they realize it or not, much to the chagrin, I think, of the emerging Theravada movement to be included as unwittingly Mahayanans. Other key writings here is key themes is upya. You find in the Lotus Sutra skillful means. Now it was probably written in the northwest of India, but given its long period of development, maybe 100 years, and its several versions and editions, it probably was written by several people, added to in and around that region. Then we have a fourth kind of strata or developmental phase of Mahayana writings, which would be called the Tantras. Especially this follows the transmission of Buddhism into Tibet. There was an attempt at getting Buddhism to go into Tibet, which was rebuffed because of the traditional religion, the religion of Bon, which was really quite friendly towards women, and their co-equality with men, largely, and their inclusion in devotional practices. Bon is an animistic faith. It is all about the cycles of life and fertility and much like that. It's not quite Hinduism, although you could see similarities with it. And the first attempt failed to transmit Tibetan into Tibetan Mahayana teaching. But in the 7th century it was successful, and partially because Mahayana became adopted so much of the Bon religion into its thinking, and especially into its iconography, its images, and into its devotional practices. It basically took the Bon devotional practices and imagery and gave them a lick of paint. Probably similar in the way that many of the pantheon of Greek gods were renamed after saints, and pagan temples relabeled churches, perhaps in 4th century Rome, when Rome was Christianized by, think of Constantine, what he did. So one vehicle, skillful means, probably written in the northwest. The Lotus Sutra, the Tantras, written in Tibet, beginning in the 5th century, but really the 7th century. And this literature draws into Mahayana Buddhism a whole new, this Bon religion, and a whole new set of practices. It absorbs into it. And so you could say it's Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana or Diamond Way Buddhism is entirely a new turning, a third turning, certainly different to earlier Mahayana thinking. But it incorporates still the theology or the doctrine or the beliefs, the metaphysics of earlier Indian Mahayana. Now, again, we're going to think about a little bit more about this collection of literature, the Prajna Paramita, and I'd like you to do some notes on this. So you might get a big A3 page, or you could do this as a mind map. Put in the middle 2nd century BC to 1st century AD, the Prajna Paramita and beyond, perfection of wisdom literature, and we have these kind of 4 basic schools. Okay, so beyond the perfection of wisdom literature. So pause the video and create your mind map notes. Okay, first to add to your A3 page is the Lotus Sutra, Ekyana, written between 50 and 150 AD, with the central theme of Ekyana, the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra really is about the one path, or the one vehicle, or the one way. It's essential claim. There are not many ways of which, there are many apparent ways, but the ultimate truth is there's only one truth, one way. And this is one of the biggest departures from the Theravadan views within Mahayana, that the universality of the Mahayana path. In the Theravadan tradition, Buddhas are rare, but will achieve Nibbana under the teaching of the Buddha and become arahats. In the Mahayana tradition, everyone universally eventually will become Buddhas. There's only one path or vehicle that exists to achieve Nibbana, and that's the Bodhisattva path. And we're really all, in the ox cart, not the goat cart, in the imagery of the Lotus Sutra's burning house parable. There's only one vehicle, one way, whether we realize we're in it or not. So there's 7 of these parables in the Lotus Sutra, in the 23 odd chapters. And the one that everyone knows is the parable of the burning house, and it's the important one. And it's there to show that Theravada teachings only go so far and actually don't take you the whole way. And it's Mahayana teachings that will take you the whole way. Theravada think when they get to Nibbana, they have arrived, but the house they're in is burning and they need help. That's the message, the polemical message. And it's about establishing Mahayana authority. Now, in order to do this, you want to have the person, the narrator, the author of the text is someone important. And who's the most important in Buddhism? Well, the Buddha. And the speaker in the Lotus Sutra telling the story of the burning house parable is the Buddha. This parable is put in his mouth as if it's the secret teaching that he then gave that was held back from the Theravada. And since the Buddha is the revealer of truth, of Dhamma, and knows ultimate truth, this technique gives the Lotus Sutra an ultimate authority within Buddhism. There's a similar sort of thing that's going on in the Quran, you could argue, where the later revelations overtake the earlier revelations. And this is kind of what's going on here. The claim is there is a later revelation revealed to Nagarjuna and to the Mahayana that wasn't there to the earlier Theravada, and it gives them a greater authority within Buddhism. So at the start of the Lotus Sutra, it describes all those present who are listening, and makes the point that some of them there are arahats, and in their arrogance, they leave when the Buddha starts teaching. What's it saying? It's saying Theravada don't want to listen to the Buddha. And since enlightened beings cannot have the trait of arrogance, it's clear an indication these arahats haven't really reached enlightenment. The Tathagata Sutra was written between a little bit later, so the thus gone one, the Buddha Nature School Sutra, written in the 2nd century over a 50-year period, and is claimed that this is the earliest expression of Buddha nature, that the idea there is an actual hidden Buddha dwelling within the being of each person and each creature. Now, like the Lotus Sutra, the Tathagata Sutra has 9 similes, pictures, to explain what Buddha nature is. So the first simile in the first chapter describes this fantastic scene where the Buddha is teaching and miracles are happening. Now, this already is different to what Theravada like to show or talk about. Remember, in Theravada, miracles aren't that big a deal. Mahayana, much more big deal. So, following this story of the Buddha's teaching and his miracles, we have these 8 similes to illustrate how the Buddha indwells sentient beings, all sentient beings in fact, but is hidden by negative mental states. Negative mental states in the Sanskrit is kelsas. We have these kelsas that are like muck that covers the diamond, or dirt that covers the mirror, that need to be cleaned off, wiped off. It's compared to honey protected by bees. It's compared to the kernels enclosed by their husks, a gold nugget in an element that a miner might find, a hidden treasure beneath a house, a sprout in the seed becoming a huge tree, a Tathagata Garbha image wrapped in rotten rags, a Krakavarden in the womb of a despised orphan woman, so a baby in the womb of a woman who will become a king, as it were, a golden figure within a burnt clay mold. And this list of similes is there as hyperbole to teach and emphasize the importance, the truth that we all have one. It's not an argument, a logical argument, it's a poetic kind of claim that has rhetoric force. So this group of texts became very influential. The Tathagata Sutra in early Chinese Buddhism, even though the Buddhist sect that produced them largely died out in India. Fascinating, isn't it? Mahayana largely and Theravada died out in India, and yet this text took hold in Chinese Buddhism. So, it became known as Mahayana Chan, or Buddhism, where the word Chan just means the same as Zen, or Dhyana means meditation. And much of Chan, which would become Zen Buddhism, owes much of its teaching to this obscure sect that goes all the way back to the Mahasanghikas of the Andhra region, the Katkika schools. This is the Buddha nature school, an obscure sect of Buddhism that lies at the root of Zen Buddhism and Chan Buddhism before that. Remember this term, Mahasamgika, the great, they're taking on this name, the greater Sangha Buddhists in the Andhra region of China. So this is the emergence of Chinese Buddhism, Chan Buddhism, Buddha nature Buddhism. It's obscure, but it's an important little nugget that leads to Zen Buddhism, a very important kind of Buddhism in Mahayana. A third important text is the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra is the shortest prajna paramita, and that's deliberate. It's designed to be short because there are a lot of long texts, Now, Edward Conze, Buddhist scholar, estimates in his book sutras date to be about 350 CE, and that's probably about right. The teaching in it is supposed to be given by the Bodhisattva. Now notice the difference here. It's not ascribed like in the Lotus Sutra to the Buddha, but to the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara. Notice the change here. This is perhaps a text that is less polemical and is more a mature Mahayana text. Here we're seeing the maturing out of the polemical stage of Mahayana. This is an insider text, a text that is to be used by Mahayana Buddhists for Mahayana Buddhists. And it emphasizes Avalokitesvara. Now, that assumes a whole spread of things that we've looked at over in the last 4 lessons of Mahayana. You know about bodhisattvas, beings of compassionate mind, and who mightn't well, if they achieve this a level of enlightenment where they become Sambhakaya in Trikaya doctrine, they achieve heavenly realm status because they can answer our prayers. And the most famous and perhaps earliest is Avalokitesvara, who answers our prayers. So at the Heart Sutra we have the central teaching given by the central and most important figure, Avalokitesvara. And it's given to a company of Arahats and Bodhisattvas, Mahayanans and Theravadins, as it were, who are presented as equal in the presence of the Buddha. Now notice the Buddha flanks Avalokitesvara. The Buddha is there to give, again, that seal of authority in the story, and yet he is sidelined in favour of Avalokitesvara. Now, in terms of textual criticism, there are many textual variants of this text that emerged at 350 CE, and all are legitimate versions of the text. And that's if you're looking for some canonization that the Quran or the Bible might claim, Buddhists aren't so interested in that process as certainly Mahayana. Maybe Theravada are interested in the canonization of the Pali Canon, but Mahayana less interested, as it were. Remember the idea of skill in means. It's for a purpose. It's pragmatic. Does it work? But most of the versions are very similar. What is in the Heart Sutra then? Well, it's divided into some sections. In the first section, Avalokitesvara, who represents wisdom, prajna, gives his analysis of the human condition. So this is a dharma, this is a truth. And his analysis is there's nothing which lies outside of the 5 aggregates of human existence. Well, what about Nibbana? Does that not lie outside the 5 aggregates of human existence? Now he then addresses Sariputra. Now Sariputra, who is the Buddha's most important original disciple, who probably represents Theravada, or possibly earlier Mahayana schools, and begins to teach about sunyata, emptiness, this key Mahayana doctrine. The next section, Avalokitesvara goes on through the basic teachings of the Buddha, beginning with the Four Noble Truths, but giving a sort of Mahayana slant on these, saying these are the conventional reality and not the true reality, because the true reality speaks of an ultimate truth. So Mahayanas sign up to the Four Noble Truths, but they reinterpret them. That's conventional. The ultimate truth is neither ceasing desire or desire exist, the third noble truth. Desire is not our problem, the second noble truth. It is dualistic thinking is our problem. Again, suffering is caused, the first noble truth, not by desire, but by false understanding. And so this ultimate truth way of interpreting the Four Noble Truths is a very different Mahayana take on the Four Noble Truths. The next section is a mantra at the end, and it's not easy to translate. It's not entirely grammatical, and much Sanskrit is difficult to interpret anyway. It is thought, for example, by the current Dalai Lama to be measuring an individual's level of spiritual attainment. It's a very esoteric little bit of the text that's difficult to understand. Well, there is still a notion of progression in Mahayana. It's not a free-for-all. And only those who are worthy, as it were, can really read this text. And if you can read it, then you have reached a certain level of spiritual attainment. The next strata of sutras, and again, you can do some further research on this if you want, is the Diamond Sutra. Notice this image in the far right, a Nepalese sculpture for Vajra, or a thunderbolt. Third turning Buddhism. This is the emergence of Diamond Way Buddhism, which took off eventually in Tibet and then beyond that to Mongolia, and eventually large parts of China were influenced by this. So Diamond Way Sutra is linked to the emergence of Tibetan Buddhism, and it emphasizes, perhaps following the influence of Yogacara, school of Mahayana, the practice of non-abiding and non-attachment. Non-abiding and non-attachment. And it is a very influential Mahayana sutra in East Asia. It is actually, as an object of devotion and an object of study in Zen Buddhism. Think, for example, when Zen Buddhists do zazen, they sit with their eyes half closed and they're trying to practice non-abiding and non-attachment, neither here nor not here, here nor not here. The Sanskrit title for this text is Vajra Chedika Prajna Paramita Sutra. So it's the diamond way perfection of the perfect literature. Our literature is better than all the previous literature is kind of what's being claimed here. Translated roughly as the Vajra, or the diamond cutter of perfection. Now, so think, if Theravada was silver standard and Mahayana was gold standard, well, this is diamond standard Buddhism, and it's diamond tipped blade to cut away ignorance, wisdom. The hyperbole here is ratcheted right up. We are the best of the best of the best, they're claiming. In English, shortened forms of such as the Diamond Sutra or Vajra Sutra are common in referring to it. The power of the diamond or thunderbolt to cut things, especially ignorance, is a metaphor for the type of wisdom that shatters illusions and gets us to ultimate reality, or Buddha nature. So this Vajra Chedika Prajna Paramita Sutra contains the discourse of the Buddha to a senior monk, Subhuti. Now, fascinating this. This is this senior monk Subhuti who receives this perfected of perfection wisdom straight from the Buddha. Again, there's I got my Buddhism from the Buddha, and my revelation's more recent than yours, more later than yours, so mine's more important than yours, is all being claimed here. It's all about authority. Now, the major themes of the text itself are Atman. You remember from Hinduism, Atman is the soul. Anatta is, the second of the three universal truths. Remember, Anaka, impermanence, Anatta, no self, and dukkha, dukkha, suffering. These are the three universal truths. But Anatman takes it further. This is a stance, a way of life. Anatman, not self, not no self, anatta, no self for just the skandhas, as Theravada would say, but pushes it further. Anatman means not self. You accept non-abiding. You have a casual approach to all of life. I'm reminded of a friend of mine who was a Buddhist who went through terrible suffering, and his daughter, had leukemia, and his response was to say, it's just change. And I wondered at this. And he had this non-abiding, non-attachment, continual attitude to all of life. I neither exist nor do not exist. I am like a leaf being blown around in the wind. Think of that picture from the beginning and the end of the film Forrest Gump, like a leaf being just blown around by the wind. That's all you are, and you accept that, and you commit yourself to that casual relation to all things, non-attachment, non-abiding. And this is drawn from the doctrine of the emptiness of all phenomena, sunyata. Although the idea doesn't appear in the text, it's basic to Anatman. The liberation of all beings without attachment, and the importance of spreading the teaching of the Diamond Sutra itself are key themes also in the text. So, how have we done today? We should have covered different schools of Mahayana and in the context of the countries they were developed and are practiced in the 2nd century, 1st century CE, and maybe a little bit beyond, in order to understand the 3 schools of Mahayana.